OpenAI, the most misnamed company on earth, is a closed system. I think it's very, very important as we are building a technology that is going to literally substitute to some extent human intelligence, that has the capacity to take charge of our lives and therefore nefariously, if possible, manipulate us. I think it's extremely important that the ownership, the actual ownership of that technology is also decentralized.
So I want to start with your career. Actually, you've had a very interesting career trajectory with journalism at the Wall Street Journal to blockchain at MIT, and now you're at Decentralized AI. Can you share a bit about your journey? What motivated you to go through this journey?
Interestingly, we're in Bangkok. It kind of actually begins here. So this is going way back, if you want to go back that far. I was living in Bangkok and I was teaching English as a wayward backpacker, just trying to figure my way in the world and getting out of a job that I didn't like, living in Perth, Western Australia. And I found English teaching, but I started to meet a lot of journalists here and I got very interested in becoming one. And so, interesting, literally, it was Bangkok that began my journey. I went back to Perth and became a journalist. And I actually wrote a bunch of stories about here, life in Thailand and particularly in Burma, where there was a war going on. So that was the beginnings of everything. And then I ended up becoming a financial journalist by way of Jakarta, Indonesia. I was the bureau chief for an outfit called AFX, landed my way into finance, and then got to New York, ended up working for Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal and covering currencies. And that kind of became the main foundation for everything that I did. 6 years in Argentina in 2003 to 2009, though, are probably the most important for what led me into Bitcoin, because that was the place that sort of demonstrated to me the failure of government institutions in the management of monetary systems and the lack of trust that can develop in societies around broken institutions. Argentina has a long history of financial crises and a lot of issues around trust in money and government. So it was in that context that when I first discovered Bitcoin, when I was writing back in New York at this point, in New York in 2013, writing about Bitcoin as a currency, I was intrigued by it, but I really didn't understand it. And some folks came to me and said, look, this would be an interesting way to think about the Argentine problem, that you could have a math-based system of trust that would allow for transactions and finance to be run in that way. And it blew my mind, and I never looked back. Wrote a book about it with my colleague Paul Vigna. We wrote the book The Age of Cryptocurrency, and then I got really interested in all the other multiple applications of blockchain. Ethereum, I'd met Vitalik around that time, and Ethereum had just come out, and so that drew me to MIT. Eventually left the journal in 2015, went to MIT, worked on Decentralized, the digital currency initiative up there. Very early days of exploring what we now call RWA and tokenization systems back then. But in around 2019, was dragged back into media and did 4 years as the chief content officer at CoinDesk. The ups and downs of that market led to some disruptions at CoinDesk, and we decided to sort of part our ways, and I ended up looking into what I think is, to me, the most exciting phase of blockchain development since those days of Ethereum and early days of Bitcoin, and that is the decentralized AI space. I think it's a space that needs a lot of coordinated collaboration right now if it is going to be able to take on the massive lead that the centralized model has for AI. I also think it's an absolutely human imperative that we get there. So DAIS, the Decentralized AI Society, has been set up to help form that alliance amongst the various players in the tech stack who are building the pieces that will go into the DEAI economy to give them, a better chance to sort of unify, pool resources, and take on the centralized model.
Fascinating story. So it must be really interesting for you to come back here.
It is. It's been 32 years, and so it is. It's been quite a big deal to be back here. Yeah.
Awesome. And which year was it actually when you came here?
I lived here in 1990, look, it's a funny story. I was an accountant, and I hated accounting. I absolutely hated what I was doing, and then this was a radical change. I just threw it all away and just backpacked around in Thailand and ended up staying here and teaching English. Found got into journalism, but then I find it ironic. I was a financial journalist, and when I got into blockchain, I often make that reference that I began with a ledger. I was an accounting, and blockchains are ledgers. And I like to say, but it's a really sexy ledger as opposed to the ledgers I was dealing with back in those days. So I never imagined that I'd go full circle and that the accountant in me would somehow be connected in all of this. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. How would you compare Bangkok to from 1990 to today? What are the biggest differences?
The biggest difference really is, there's a lot more buildings, there's a lot more built up. It feels like the infrastructure actually is more solid. And in particular, the most important is the mass transit system, which didn't exist when I was here. So it's still chaotic and noisy and traffic jammed, and that's just an inherent part of this very dynamic, wild city. But back then it was even wilder, and there was, it was very hard to get around. And so the creation of the mass transit system has helped a lot. But I mean, I don't know, you probably see it anymore, but back when I was here, you'd sometimes be stuck in a traffic jam and there would literally be an elephant in the traffic next to you, because a lot of the buildings that were going up, they were still using laborers from out of town, and they were using elephants to move wood, to move building supplies. It's just a long tradition that elephants are part of the construction process. And so you would sometimes see elephants in the traffic in Bangkok in 1990.
That's wild.
True story.
That is wild. But let's get back to Decentralized AI. Can you introduce us to Decentralized AI and what your primary goals are here, and what are you trying to achieve with Decentralized AI Society?
Yeah. So, look, decentralization is different from open source, for one. People, I think, confuse open source. Open source is one piece of it. The idea that we should have open models, that we can see the tech, the same tradition that we've seen through open source for software, for many, many decades now, should be applied to AI. So, OpenAI, the most misnamed company on earth, is a closed system. And so we need the tech, we need the actual software to be open, say along the lines of what, Facebook has with Llama and so forth. But that's just one piece of it. I think it's very, very important as we are building a technology that is going to literally substitute to some extent human intelligence, that has the capacity to take charge of our lives and therefore nefariously, if possible, manipulate us. I think it's extremely important that the ownership, the actual ownership of that technology is also decentralized. And so that the open source part of it doesn't necessarily address that, because there are so many other means by which you can take power in an open source system. If you own all the data, for example, as the Web 2 companies do, the Facebooks, the Metas, the Googles, the Alphabets, the Amazons and the like, they own our data. That is a huge monopolizing force that, as we know from the Web 2 experience, can be used in a manipulative way. We have become, in Bruce Schneier's famous words, Facebook's product, not Facebook's customer. If we take that model into the AI age, we put it on steroids. And the problem with the model is the incentive structure, that these companies, like any company that's driven by the need to meet quarterly profits and make sure that bonuses are being paid and so forth under essentially a growth model driven by the VC initial funding structure, they will constantly be driving to maximize profits. And the fastest way to do that is to use that data as a force to manipulate the market to your ends. And that, as I said, in Web 2 meant that we became the manipulated. We were the products. We don't want that. We need to be in charge of our lives, and that means that not just the actual source code, but the ownership and therefore the incentive structure needs to be different. And I think that the only way to do that is tokenization. We need to have a mechanism by which the models are owned by us. Now, there are various other pieces to it as well, right? The compute is a huge part of the AI economy, and right now that's essentially a very centralized model. Lots of concentrated power inside data centers using high-end NVIDIA chips run over cloud services, most often monopolized by Amazon Web Services, AWS. So you have these systems of compute, the huge commodity almost that drives the development of foundational models and everything else, being sort of owned in this very centralized way. So we need to think about how are we going to decentralize the compute market, decentralize the model building, decentralize also the relationship that we have with these AI engines, these services. We're moving into an agentic world, this idea of these independent AI agents that will operate on our behalf. Well, we need to know that we can trust that entity to act on our behalf. If it's owned by some big external corporation under a closed black box model, how do I know that this thing is acting in my behalf and not front running in the interest of that company? So we're going to have to build systems. All of it needs to be privacy preserving, obviously, and that, ironically, for something that is based on the concept of a public blockchain, is also very deeply ingrained into the ethos of the crypto world. So we've got the need to build confidential compute and ZK type solutions in all of this. So it's to me, it's vital for the imperative of humanity that we do this. But I would also argue that eventually it becomes an economic imperative, because as much as it is always more efficient to run compute in a centralized way, to run any form of computation, it's expensive to build a blockchain decentralized computation model. We know this. As much as that is the case, intelligence is always more economically advantaged when it's open. It is a known fact that the wisdom of the crowd, the internet as opposed to the intranet, is going to be a more powerful economic driver when it comes to knowledge, right? So there is actually a driving force to open this whole system up, and that is the need to have greater knowledge. In addition, the internet itself is not built for this kind of massive computation and a sort of agentic system. If we're going to be having all of these agents operating on our behalf, there's no way that they'll able just to be able to query into one centralized data server. They're going to have to be pushed. The computation is going to have to happen at the edges. So the models, the computation, and everything's going to have to push out to our devices, and we're going to have this edge compute structure. Well, that has to be run, as far as I'm concerned, on a decentralized framework. So there is a certain sort of a physical and economic imperative that runs in parallel with the moral imperative. The problem is that the big guys who own the centralized model have every interest in maintaining their incumbency, and they have policymakers that are essentially potentially under their control. And there is a real risk that they will use regulatory capture to entrench their models as opposed to the open systems. So we've got a battle on our hands. The physics and the economics, I think, eventually push to a decentralized solution. But if this happens faster than that under a centralized model, we run the risk of building something very, very dangerous.
Can you tell us a bit about how people and individuals, organizations can get involved with Decentralized AI Society?
So the Decentralized AI Society is a non-for-profit. So any entity that's working in this space can reach out to us. The website is dais.global, and put in a request, and we will consider applications for membership. We have a tiered membership structure where there are founding members who are we tend to look at this as the larger players, but there's opportunities for smaller, less funded startups to come in at a different tier. The basic idea is that we want to build a framework in which the providers of the underlying blockchain layer 1 and layer 2 technologies, alongside infrastructure providers like Filecoin, which is one of our early founding members, are there to provide this base layer of infrastructure. But to combine that with the folks who are building marketplaces, for example, in compute, or who are building systems for AI agents to be built on open models, but right up to the level of the actual service providers, the consumer apps that are being built now that are privacy preserving and built on a decentralized architecture that will service the variety of applications that we see AI happening. So we're really looking to get members and participants from across the ecosystem, so that there's sort of a representative element of what that AI economy looks like. And out of that, we'll develop working groups that can focus on the myriad challenges that we face, whether it's the engineering challenges for figuring out how do you do decentralized machine learning, or the policy challenges that are going to be very important as well, that we act as an advocacy group to make sure that decentralized models, decentralized systems are given a fair chance to compete in this space.
Yeah, I wanted to dive into the challenges actually. Like, what would you say are the main challenges in developing and implementing in decentralized AI, and what advice would you give to those who want to build in this field?
So I break the challenges down into 4 areas, and they're all almost equally large, and they're all interrelated. But the first one I would start is just literally capital. Right? If we look at the top 6 companies, in fact the top 7 now, given the strong outperformance of Tesla lately, and you think you can include Tesla in the group, given that Elon Musk is very deeply invested in AI and has a large sway of influence on the US government now. Those 7, sometimes known as the Magnificent 7, control $17 trillion in market cap, which is more than a third of the size of the S&P 500. That is an astounding amount of power when it comes to monetary power. And we know from the way that these companies acted during the Web 2 era that they will use that currency to acquire whatever innovations come their way, sometimes to integrate them into their systems, and sometimes just to take them back out to the woodshed, beat them up and take them out of existence, right? To remove the threat to their model by acquiring that innovation. How do we fight that? Right? How do we fight that from a world in which we need to raise VC capital? I don't think we've got a chance. I don't think the old model could possibly compete with that. For the other reason, it's going to just fall for the same trap of being this sort of motivated to drive towards the wrong ends. I think the only way that we will raise enough capital is through decentralized ownership. We need tokenized systems that get there. But that brings me to the next challenge, which is the sort of fractionalized, fragmented state of the crypto space. We need interoperability. We need all of these digital asset systems, these platforms, blockchains, tokens, to far better coordinate with each other, because by fragmenting, we might raise money here and there, but we'll never get enough. So there's a certain amount of coordination that needs to go into that. Now, that is an engineering challenge, because until we resolve interoperability and the efficiencies that come with scaling across all of those chains, we're going to be grappling with inefficiencies around compute and a variety of other challenges within the engineering world that make it much harder to compete with decentralized systems. So how do we get machine learning to happen on a decentralized basis? We're going to have to figure out how do we abstract away what is used, what is actually recorded in a blockchain, what isn't. How do we deal with storage and compute, and can we fragment that, parallel compute? There's a variety of engineering challenges that need to be addressed if we can bring the machine learning and other aspects of AI into a more effective competitive environment. The third area is policy. Right now, the EU and the US are having an approach to the regulation of AI that is not at all helpful to decentralized models. This is this idea that you need to register your model if it's based on a large enough compute basis with the government, treating it almost as if it's a weapon. This is the US concern with China, for example. And that's just impossible for a decentralized network to do, because who are you going to call? Who's in charge of this? So we need policy that's going to be much more amenable to decentralized structures. We don't need the developers and the founders working on open source systems to be subpoenaed or thrown in jail because they're building a weapon. We need policies that are going to allow that to flourish. And then the fourth one is education. Right now, the general public, it's a similar problem we've faced with crypto for more than 10 years, is that they don't fully grasp why. They don't understand why a decentralized AI system is valuable. So how do we get people along for the ride? And I don't know that it's just wagging our finger and saying, you've got your privacy at risk here, because privacy concerns don't seem to drive the needle here. but a deeper understanding of not just the threat that it's posed by having all of that data controlled by an entity that you have no means of managing, but also we need to be talking about the opportunities, all of the incredible new applications that will arise, for example, in healthcare. If I could have my own data managed and driven in through a model where I've got control over it so that those healthcare applications can be built for me. So getting people to see that the path forward for a positive AI rather than a negative one, both in terms of the cool innovations that will happen, but also because of the protections that it brings, that's really important. We need people to be able to understand that. So that's why I'm saying the fourth challenge is public education, which is a key part of what DEIS is about. We do events, we do, I come from a journalist background, so I'm in the business of writing and telling narratives and helping people understand why these things are important.
We're at EA Day in Bangkok, and can you tell us what brings you here? Because there's, I believe, 900 plus side events happening in Bangkok this week. Yeah. Why did you pick to come here?
Well, I was invited for one, so and I've known Paul Brody for a long time, and look, I think I always feel as if the enterprise bridge from the crypto world to the enterprise world is one that just has to be built. Like it's vital that we bring the mainstream companies that are just as much victims, I would argue, as individuals sometimes in the way that these centralized systems work against them, into the capacity to build on this space. And I do think that Paul Brody's point about Ethereum being the winner is a reasonable one. I don't know if I fully agree with it, but I certainly agree with the idea that the reason why it has this lead is because of the sophistication of the way that the ecosystem is operating now, and how, in particular, that is now creating opportunities for enterprises that all they used to talk about was building private chains because they couldn't trust the public chains. Now they're building on either on Ethereum itself, on layer 2s, or on EVM compatible chains like Polygon, because this is where to build. So I think the Enterprise Alliance, Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, has just been really doggedly driving this point home, and I've always been very supportive of that idea that they are a home for enterprises to embrace public blockchains, to build on these open systems. So I think that's a very important part of this. And hey, we're here at DevCon. It's the Ethereum story, and to be part of a day that's sort of very much aligned with the broader Ethereum mission makes this a really important place to be. We would definitely regard any members of the Ethereum ecosystem as vital members of what DEIS is doing.
How have you seen the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance evolve since the Momentum event earlier this year?
Yeah, so I attended the Momentum event in New York, and I think that was the right at the moment that Karen Scarborough took over the leadership of it. And so I think the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance is now consolidated under a more I think sort of permanent management structure, which I think is a wonderful thing. And Karen's been a force of good for the alliance. So and I think in parallel to that, there are developments in the broader universe, the sort of healthier regulatory environment, for example, for crypto and specifically for Ethereum, with the ETF, for example, and so forth, bringing a much more sort of open environment for enterprises to feel as if they can participate in here. That regulatory threat that was always hanging over the participation in this space is now quite likely to disappear if we are to read what the leaders within the new US administration are saying. So there's a sort of an interesting parallel of the sort of maturation, if you like, of the Enterprise Alliance and its management structure alongside the external developments within the US and elsewhere that I think create real opportunities for enterprises to take advantage of this model.
And finally, looking ahead, what are your aspirations for the future of decentralized AI?
I think unless decentralized AI becomes the default, the way in which we approach this, then I think we have a big problem. I think there's this concept of the Internet of AI that's out there, and that gives me hope because at some point in the battle to define the internet, there was a battle between intranets, these sort of closed walled garden systems, and the more open model. And the open model won because it was just unavoidable. You're not going to win unless you had an open email system as opposed to one that was controlled by Prodigy or AOL or whomever. And so I hope and I actually believe that a similar imperative will happen with decentralized AI. And so we're going to end up with this, Internet of AI, which is essentially a way of saying a decentralized model for the AI economy is going to just emerge out of default.